It's July 26th, 2021. I'm Jian Gomeshi. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 130 of Roqe. Hope you're keeping well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Salam Dustan Aziz. Durud. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. We are coming to you on roqemedia.com. It is there that you can link to all of our platforms, roqemedia.com. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. Hello, Groovy Shaya.
Hi.
Hi, Captain Reza.
Hello, sir.
We're doing things a little different today. Yes. We're going to get straight to the subject matter. And, if you're not Iranian, or actually even more specifically, you might be Iranian, but if you're not someone who follows Persian media in Persian, you'd be forgiven for not knowing that there is a new heartbreaking crisis happening in Iran. Protests, shootings, this time primarily located in the southwestern Khuzestan region. Of course, there are people speaking out, Iranians in social media. We had a large demonstration of folks here in Toronto last Friday. A bunch of us were there. And there have been similar gatherings around the Iranian diaspora and, of course, in Iran. But folks might be asking, what is going on? Well, and let me put this in extremely simplistic, but I think accurate terms. Here's a quick descriptor. Iran, and particularly the region of Khuzestan, including cities like Ahvaz and Ahvaz-born, is suffering terrible water shortages. Now, these water shortages, which can affect the basic needs of water for drinking or hygiene, have been caused, and not to mention for farmers as well, for agriculture, have been caused at least partly by chronic mismanagement and corruption by the state, the Iranian government. And then, in dark trademark fashion, when ordinary folks have raised their voices to clamor for those most basic of living conditions, there has been a clampdown, a crackdown by the same state, where protesters have been shot and killed just for asking for water, basically. This is a sad and maddening pattern that is also not entirely surprising. So on this edition of Roqe, we want to spend the whole episode talking about this, since it is not appearing really in Western media in English. Have you seen this?
No.
It's kind of weird, right?
It is bizarre. It's just, to me, that's a true testament that the size of a tragedy has nothing to do with whether or not it deserves media attention. I mean, this is crazy. People are in desperate need of basic human need, water, and are getting beaten up, shot at, and there is absolutely zero coverage in the Western media. I don't understand.
We cover you see things correctly in the Western media, like the George Floyd situation, which in fact the whole world knew about.
Yeah.
But then you kind of think, well, where people are being shot for nothing? Where is the coverage on this? Is it just that Iran doesn't matter anymore, or we're used to this, or and where the media will be focused on something someone might have tweeted 20 years ago rather than this dire situation that you would hope that people would talk about. So anyway, we want to try and do this here in English and get some real context for how the crisis emerged, what the water situation actually is in Iran, what the mechanics of the dysfunction are, the incompetence, the mismanagement, and how to explain and understand the regime's brutal and bloody response this time. So for that, we are turning to two people with perspectives that are both valuable and born from years of experience. Kaveh Madani, the popular scientist and academic and writer who's perhaps best positioned to explain exactly what's going on in Iran with respect to water and the environment. Not only is he a scientist, he was briefly in government, the head of the environment, basically vice president of the environment in Iran in that harrowing year that he was there. And he knows of what he speaks if he's talking about mismanagement or the water supply, or as he calls it, water bankruptcy, which has now become more part of the lexicon. But when he was saying that 2 or 3 years ago, people were kind of going, well, this guy's being alarmist, So he's somebody that I really want to speak to on this, Kaveh Madani. And then a little later, Amir Taheri, the veteran journalist and editor in Paris who's been covering Iranian affairs for decades, including as editor-in-chief of Kayhan newspaper from 1972 to 1979 in Iran. We're coming to you on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and CastBox. And if you want to see some visuals with Roqe, and you're not looking at us on YouTube or Instagram, you can check us out on social media. Switch over to YouTube or Instagram right now. On all of our platforms, it's at Roqe Media. And if you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and Persian, check us out on Telegram. Again, you can link to all those platforms from our main hub, roqemedia.com, where you can also become a patron of our program. We crowdsource to keep this show going and keep our mission alive to build this audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. So if you're a regular listener or you like what you hear, roqemedia.com, go and press the red button there that says support us. And for $5 or $10 a month or more, if you wish, you can support roqemedia.com. Even a minimal amount means a lot to us. Hey, a big thank you for this edition of Roqe to myterms.ca. myterms.ca and Arash and Anita Fazelipour. They are life partners, they're business partners, they're the founders of myterms.ca. This is a mortgage company based here in Ontario, Canada. They're both born in Iran but grew up in Canada and the States. They decided to go into business and life together almost 20 years ago, and they have a really good record with myterms.ca, focusing on the service aspect of the mortgage business. They are very well reviewed online, and they make it a big priority to give back to the Persian community as well. Arash and Anita Fazelipour and myterms.ca. Check out myterms.ca for any and all aspects of your mortgage needs. In the coming days on Roqe, Reza, Dr. Sheila Nazarian, the amazingly successful plastic surgeon and Netflix star, and somebody who's really paying back to her community in various ways, the Iranian community, the Jewish community. Dr. Sheila Nazarian joining us. Hamid Saeedi, who is the Grammy Award-winning Santoor player with Opium Moon. Ali Parsa, the Iranian-British engineer and the founder of Babylon Health. And just a really inspirational guy going from refugee to billionaire. Ali Parsa. Tara Tiba, the Iranian Australian singer-songwriter, and Alex Bakardi and Vahid Amiri for a special edition of Roqe on Persians and cars.
Nice.
The two things that go together.
Hand in hand.
Persians, cats, and cars.
That's right.
We got a lot of letters about our episodes last week with Behzad Bulur and Kayvan Zand, separate episodes. We're going to get to those letters on Thursday. The fabulous Keon is currently on her extended birthday holiday. So she'll join us, I think, from where she is, which is somewhere in the Caribbean or something, on Thursday, and we'll get to the letters of the week then and more. But let's now get to our episode for today, explaining Khuzestan. Well, when my first guest today spent years talking about water bankruptcy, as he coined it, in Iran, he was sometimes accused of being dramatic or overstating the case. But sadly, scientist and activist Kaveh Madani was all too prophetic in his expectations of what can and will happen in today's Iran when it comes to natural resources, and in particular, water. It's become all too real in regions like Khuzestan right now. Kaveh was born in Iran and first left for his studies at the age of 22 and went on to become an acclaimed expert on environment and water supply. As many of you listening will know, and as we discussed when he was last on Roqe last year, Kaveh spent a harrowing year serving as Iran's deputy vice president for the environment in 2017 and 2018 before he had to literally escape with his life. Since then, he has continued to emerge as an acclaimed, globally recognized academic and speaker when it comes to Iran and particularly environmental issues. In 2019, he was selected by the American Geophysical Union to receive the Hydrologic Sciences Early Career Award. He's won a bunch of other awards as well. Kaveh is a writer, a professor, currently a Henry Hart Rice Senior Fellow at Yale University, and a visiting professor at Imperial College London. And right now, Kaveh Madani joins me from Toronto, Canada today. Hello, sir.
Hi, Jian. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for being back on the program. I wish there were better circumstances for when you get invited to go on programs, but I guess unfortunately, there's crises, and I do want to get to this water bankruptcy in your prophetic words. But first, Kaveh, the news coming out of Iran, and in particular Khuzestan in the last couple of weeks, has been shocking for some of us, saddening. But let me ask you from the outset, how surprised are you?
I'm not surprised at all. This is one of those rare moments that I wish my science were wrong. It's really sad to see this situation and watch from abroad and not be able to do anything for the people who are suffering.
You know, I want to get to some basic context from you in explaining how we got into this situation. So if you'll forgive me, and if the folks listening who know a lot about this will forgive me for these elemental questions. But first things first, when there is a crisis that involves a lack of water, especially, say, in a Middle Eastern country, I'm thinking there's a tendency to think, well, this is an arid land and this is probably an endemic problem. So on this question of being water bankrupt, does Iran have enough water to serve its population in general?
Well, there's a saying that nowhere in the world there is a shortage of water, but everywhere there is a shortage of cheap water. The question is, what do you need your water for, and what are you going to do with it, and how much money do you want to make out of it, and what sort of service you want to provide. Iran has enough water to satisfy the thirst of its population, and it has enough water to have a very active and productive industry. But doesn't have enough water to, at the same time, have to become self-sufficient in agriculture. This doesn't mean that Iran cannot produce its strategic food. Wheat can still be produced, but Iran needs to rethink about producing eggplant and cucumber and tomatoes with valuable water. For sure, Iran's water availability, naturally is much less than the average of the world. But this is something that, has been integral to Iran. This is the identity of Iran, and it has been there forever. We decided to live there, we decided to expand, we decided to develop, and we should have considered this natural income. As I say, like your annual income can be $40,000 and you still can become bankrupt, and your annual income can be $2 million and you become bankrupt. Right. If you plan wrong, then you can become bankrupt. This is the situation we are facing. Indeed, it's a post-crisis state that water expenditure has been much more than the available water, and this is the result.
Okay, so let's get into the planning wrong, as you just put it. Why the water isn't getting to the people. We can be highly critical of the current state of Iran, the current government of Iran, and extremely frustrated and angry, but it still sometimes feels reductive to blame everything always on an evil regime. How does this level of mismanagement and tragic dysfunction actually happen? How does it actually play out?
Well, we call in system science, we call this a complex problem. Complex problems, the very first rule they teach you is complex problems don't have one single cause, and never try to find one cause that justifies this situation, because every cause itself can be an effect of something else in the system. And there is a big fundamental difference between complex problems and complicated problem. Complicated problem is like finding a COVID-19 vaccine. You can eventually do it. It takes a lot of money and lots of brain, but you can eventually do it. But complex problems is like managing a COVID-19 crisis. You want to fix health, you damage economy. You want to damage economy, you damage the environment and something else. And there are tons of trade-offs, uncertainties, evolutionary behavior, and so on. So water resource problem in Iran is a complex problem. You cannot, it's easy. Yes, of course, like you can always say the regime or bad management, mismanagement. But you have to dig into this and find out what is going on if you want to understand better, and if you want to find a solution. Right now we have lots of narratives which are all correct, but very incomplete and don't provide the full picture. So
can you do it? What, I mean, having said that, it's issued the disclaimer that it's complex. What is the mismanagement? What is the dysfunction?
So here's the thing. So Iran is a very big country, very, very diverse climate, different elevations everywhere. Now, in every location in Iran, you have a certain water budget and ecological capacity. Essentially, Khuzestan is one of those places with a good budget. North of Iran, by the Caspian Sea coast, is also one of those places. So places, central Iran is very dry, of course, with limited budget. So in each place you go to, you have to plan according to the capacity you have, and make sure that the pressure you put on the system, it doesn't exceed its ecological capacity. Simply put, if you want to explain it in a very simple way, we have put too much pressure on the system, and the ecosystem has broken, and now we are seeing the feedback. But in terms of water resources, it's years and years and years of unsustainable development. The mentality that the Middle Easterns borrowed it from the West was that essentially with the oil money and with engineering and technology, we can overcome a natural limitation called a water shortage in the region. We say that, this period in Iran, which still has not ended, is the era of hydraulic mission, where the mentality of the leaders and the technocrats of the country was to capture water at any cost, through building dams, through transferring water, and use it for something beneficial in their mind: agriculture, industry, city development, and so on. But what we have learned in the West, which pursued this ideology as well at some point, was this can result in Dust Bowl. Remember the Dust Bowl in the United States. This can result in saltwater intrusion in the coastal region. Look at what happened in California. This can have dramatic environmental impacts on the lakes and wetlands. Look at the Great Lakes situation. So you cannot be the ruler of the nature. You cannot control the nature. You need to live with floods and droughts and extreme events, and you have to plan accordingly. What we have learned is that the hydraulic mission fails, and you cannot use money and engineering to solve all the problem. You have to learn to live with the water shortage you have. Khuzestan, if you want to use it as an example, is a place that we have built a lot of dams for water supply, for hydropower production, for capturing water for domestic water supply, agricultural water supply, and industrial water supply. We have also transferred water from its tributaries to other regions. We have minimized the flow of what we say clean water or fresh water into the Persian Gulf, salt water. That people thought that was a good idea. Now you have a situation that everywhere in this province you have problems as the result of unsustainable development. There are
So let me just stop you because I'm getting confused. First of all, I thought Iran was very proud of its dam building. You know, this was supposed to be a forte. You know, we know how to build the dams. How can you just explain how the dams and the water transfer play into incompetence or inefficiency or dysfunction here?
So let me ask you this. You live in Toronto. How proud are you of CN Tower? Do you care if CN Tower was taller or shorter?
I mean, it's an impressive tower. I don't think about it all the time. My
point here is that Iran built a tower which is very similar, and at the time they built it, it became the fourth tallest tower. That, to the engineers of the country, that can be a symbol of pride, but that doesn't really affect the quality of life of the Iranians, as it didn't affect the quality of life of people in Canada. Dam building, dam is a technology, and it's complicated to build it. It's not complex, it's complicated. So you can eventually find the knowledge and acquire the knowledge and build it. Iranians managed to become self-sufficient in dam building, and they indeed became the top, they made it to the top 3 dam builders in the world at the time that many in the developed world stopped building dams because of its ecological damage. Okay. It's something that I say is the thirst of development of Iran started before the revolution by the increase of the oil price, and it continued after the revolution because of war, because of sanctions, because the Iranians wanted to prove to the world that they can stand on their own feet. So big structures, big concrete structures, where it became a symbol of pride. That's something that every decision maker can take a photo with and be proud. And once you build it, it boosts the local economy. People are happy. It creates jobs. But in the long run, it affects the flow of the river. And you build too many of them, they end up being empty, and they affect, they dry up your rivers and wetlands. So we may build too many dams in Iran. We may build too many large dams in Iran. We didn't need this much storage capacity on rivers, which we're going to get empty because with declining flows because of climate change and other anthropogenic changes, land use changes, and so on. And this is the situation that we see, and it's the result. This is the point that this is the result of bad planning.
But who is? I mean, building too many dams. I mean, who's in charge? Who is there? No one to say we shouldn't build this many dams. It's going to be a problem. I mean, listen. We're going to get to the tragic, heartbreaking political element of this of clamping down on protests and stuff. But just sheerly in terms of the inefficiency of the system, who is supposed to be overseeing this?
Of course, government. So in every country where you face environmental problems or any sort of, any other sort of problem, you can blame the government, and you should blame the government. But the thing is, the tragedy is that we have seen the exact same path in the West. Like the Americans built a lot of dams, and they realized that, wait a minute, there are ecological damages. Let's change course. And the problem is that the Iranians saw this, and the Chinese saw this, the Brazilians saw this, and they're still repeating the exact same path, thinking that this is, building more dams is a sign of development. Building a tall tower is a sign of development, rather than focusing on justice, on equality, on distributing the resources in an equal way. Now, who is in charge? Of course, the government. Who decides in the government? There are like ministries. There's like a structure which with stakeholders, Ministry of Energy in charge of water and power, Department of Environment in charge of protecting the environment, Ministry of Jihad Agriculture in term, commissioned with increasing the food supply of the country, food production, Ministry of Industry and Mines, and they're also commissioned to expand the industrial sector. So from every one of these ministries, you have asked to expand. That's the plan you provide. Then you have the parliament, and the parliament is also asking for development projects in every location. So a parliament member wants to get re-elected. He or she pushes for a project to be approved in his or her basin, not thinking about the long-term effects. Add to this the problem of corruption. Add to this the problem of super hierarchy and in the system. Tehran's people in Tehran deciding for the whole country, and because of that hierarchy, there are chances for again corruption and mismanagement. So lots of deficiencies. And add to this also that there was a dominant mentality there, and still is there, that we can solve the problem through engineering solutions. So we started with digging wells, then we switched to dams, then we started transferring water, and now we're looking into desalination options. So still the mentality is there. We're not working on revising the policies. We are not working on revising the crop pattern. We're not working on revising the development pattern. And it's funny that I say we. I'm thinking I'm still one of them. But
so I mean, all of this sounds, frankly, it sounds complex and complicated to me. To you both terms. But if there is available water, and if this is and nice dams, and if this is about the system just not particularly working the way it should, and in ways that has happened in other countries as well, what do you mean then? What do you mean by water bankruptcy in Iran?
Okay, when we say enough water, as I said, it depends on what sort of demand you define. So Iran in the Middle East, if you look at Iran's per capita water availability, is one of the top countries there. Yes, it has less water than the rest of the world, but in that particular region, Iran has a lot of water. Now, what defines your demand is how you set up your economy and development path. Iran decided to expand its agricultural sector. Even before the revolution, the issue of dependency on the West for wheat as the main food was a concern. This concern grew after the revolution because Iran went into a war with the rest of the world. It had a war with Iraq. This strategy continued, and then the thinking of let's protect the poor and let's protect the farmers. Let's give them subsidies, give them free water, cheap energy. So this sector became more and more inefficient. More than 90% of water in Iran goes into the agricultural sector. At the beginning, I said there is a big difference between producing wheat as a strategic food and eggplant, right? Now we are using our food in a wrong industry for a wrong product. Now, Iran's if you look at this problem from a political economy standpoint, you realize that Iran is essentially using its water, land and natural resources to create jobs because it's afraid of unemployment. So the operations are economically inefficient. Still, they're continuing business as usual because if they cut water to the farmers, what you see is Khuzestan. If they ask people to stop using water, what you see is protests, more tensions, and so on, because they haven't planned in advance to move to expand the industrial sector, to expand the service sector. So you take, where one drop of water can produce more dollars.
But the worst part of what you're saying, I think, is that, which is, I mean, it makes sense, but it's still horrible to actually consider is that this issue, this whole issue that has caused protests and has caused a crackdown on protests, which has taken lives and has left Khuzestan and other places in Iran in disarray again, is years in the making. And that, I mean, in other words, it's not that somebody turned off the tap all of a sudden and everybody went, "Where's our water?" Like the way they block the internet. But the internet's still there. We can turn it back on. What you're saying is years of problematic planning has created this, which then would lead me to think it's going to take years to try and fix this.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what you need to get. I mean, this is what everyone needs to understand, that the problem which is created over decades cannot be fixed overnight. There is no quick fix here. Yes, there are triggers, for example, like a drought. So a drought kicked in right after 2 years of floods, by the way. People were dying in Khuzestan, if you recall, not long ago. So 2 years of really
there was floods. Right.
Unprecedented precipitation in the region. Reservoirs were full. Now you can have bad, they don't shut the tap or close the tap, but they make bad decisions. For example, in this case, in winter, they emptied the reservoir too early for power production, and it didn't rain later on, and now this is the situation. So we have some bad managers that can also play a role and exacerbate the problem. But if you look at the problem, try to analyze the problem, that person's role is minimal to the accumulation of all the mistakes, all the bad decisions that have been made over so many years and years of decisions on where to place people, where to grow, where to have population, where to develop. All these decisions have had a role and have played a major role in creation of this situation. Now, you ask about water bankruptcy, and I want to explain this. So, if for your audience, so I want them to remember this forever. Surface water that you have plenty of in Canada is essentially your checking account, your rivers and wetlands or lakes.
Right.
That's the water that every year gets renewed by the nature. That's your income. You get it. Sometimes your employer doesn't give you much. Sometimes it's generous. You get bonuses and you get more than average and so on. So now you have also a saving account. That's your groundwater. You inherited it from your ancestors, and it's there. So as a backup, if you do bad in your surface water, if you're short, you can go to it, spend a little bit of it, and you later on use your surplus to recharge it, so you stay resilient. Now, in Iran, what we have done is we have exhausted our checking account. Then we went to our saving account. We drain our saving account,
right.
and we say there is enough water, yes, but not enough water for the users which are out there now, because then we told the stakeholders, go develop, go build this industry, go expand here, go expand your agriculture, go build it, build housing units here. So now we have a lot of creditors who are claiming, a lot of stakeholders who have water rights, and we cannot satisfy their water rights. So our water system has used its credit cards, and it owes a lot of water to people, but there is not enough water to satisfy them. So I call this a situation of water bankruptcy, which is a post-crisis stage, because I say, as long as we're in a crisis, we think that we can mitigate the problem, we can fix this, we can restore everything. No, we cannot. Let's stop denying that. We have failed, and we have to admit that we have failed. We have to adapt and mitigate at the same time. Adaptation is also part of the game.
Let me pick up on a couple of things that you said in your list of ways in which this is a complex issue. At one point, you said the word corruption. How does corruption play here?
So corruption is like, okay, I'm an engineer, and studied there, and now I have a consulting firm. Now I go in, and this exists everywhere. I mean, we everywhere in the world we have this situation. Now, if they ask me to do a
Really?
feasibility
I mean,
study.
honestly, do you think that the corruption
No.
with regards to water in Canada is as bad as Iran?
No. There's the difference between existing everywhere and the level. So let me get into the level of corruption.
Yeah.
But we know that the corruption in construction a few years ago, right? We know Justin Trudeau. Exactly the same thing. Now I'm running a construction business, and I'm asked to do a feasibility study. If I go and say, "Oh, it's not feasible. It's not a good idea. It affects the environment," I don't get a project, right? I get $50,000 amount. If I go and say it's feasible and it's really good and it's beneficial, and then I fool everyone and bribe everyone, then I get a multi-million-dollar project. So I'll do that. So I have incentives to fool the system where I see others are also doing the same. And to survive, I also need to get corrupted. So it becomes part of the business. That's part of it. Then there is other things within the system. There are managers who get bribed. There are managers who make political decisions. Corruption is not only economic. There are people who also function. They're corrupt in terms of politics. They everything for them is political. They make a decision based on politics, preferring this party to another, this project to another, just because it belongs to a certain group. So all of these are part of the game, and they intensify the problem. They exacerbate the problem. The structure that we have, the governance structure that we have for the environment, creates lots of opportunities for this. And over the years, it has increased. Now, some people call it a dam mafia, or some sort of water mafia. I don't think we are facing a coordinated mafia like the Italian mafia, which also does a lot of good things. But I think it's not a coordinated system in a way. It is a corrupted market that people, different parties like to survive in, and they somehow get into this business and to win contracts.
It's not even competent enough to be coordinated. It's worse than coordinated mafia. But you also mentioned climate change, and I thought it's important to address that, because even just doing a little bit of research about this to prep to be able to speak to you, it was interesting. I mean, obviously most Iranians are, in the diaspora at least, are extreme, and I'm guessing in Iran as well, are extremely upset at the government, at the regime, and see this as just another step in the deterioration of life in Iran. But there was a couple of articles I read of people, sort of pundits, kind of saying, well, this isn't necessarily about mismanagement. Look, the drought is chronic in this region, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan. This is probably about climate change, and they're trying to make it about the government. How big a deal is this drought in questions that we're dealing with today about Khuzestan?
Okay, let's distinguish between a drought as an extreme event and climate change. So droughts existed on Earth before we humans are on it. Floods also, heat waves as well. So these are extreme climatic events which exist and they're natural, and we have to live with them. We say that climate change increases the intensity and frequency of these extreme events. So both floods, droughts, and everything. And if we now look around, so you see Western Canada and the United States, wildfires. Belgium and Germany, floods. Right. Iran, drought, right? So again, when it comes to Iran, we say regime. In other parts of the world where people trust the government more, they say climate change. I think it's the same attitude, essentially. It's, easy explanation for a complex problem, easy cause for a complex problem. Now, climate change, just like corruption, has a multiplying effect. It's a multiplier. It's a catalyst. It exacerbates the situation, like a bad decision maker, like a bad manager, like a bad minister. It's not the cause of the problem, whether you're in Canada or Germany or Iran. same thing. And it's funny because we in the climate change community in at universities, in academia, and also the activists and think tanks like to climatize every event. Why? Because they want to get attention to climate change.
Sure.
They say, look, this is climate change, right? So it gets media headlines, and climate change is something that most media want to promote. But the effect is that the managers also say, look, it's climate change. I couldn't have done anything about it. I'm not responsible.
Right.
So they don't take responsibility for it. Now, in the West is different from, global North is also different from the global South, because the global South is, there is even less responsibility, because they say, who created climate change?
Right.
The industrial economies.
Right.
It's not us. So we got to be very careful in understanding the causes and catalysts. Now, we can't tell by high certainty that a particular event is driven by climate change or how much it has been affected. We look at the past, we look at the recent history, and we say, yes, there is enough evidence that the scientific community agrees that climate change is real, is a big threat, and it has particular impacts that we should get prepared for, including more intense and longer and more frequent droughts and floods.
Okay, let me get to, you've given us great context for, and in terms of the situation, and in terms of resources, in terms of water in Iran. Let me get to the current issue or crisis and try to untangle it for me. Why is Khuzestan, I mean, last I read, 11 cities in Khuzestan are the hardest hit in Iran with water shortages. Why?
We have this situation in many cities in the country right now, and in many villages, including more than 700 villages in Khuzestan, which don't have access to even clean drinking water. And all cities in Khuzestan don't have clean drinking water. The water they get through their water distribution network is not clean for drinking, and they have to treat things using treatment equipment at home. Now, part of this was there. So for a long time, for example, drinking water quality was bad in Khuzestan, and poor people, they have got used to this, and they have kind of accepted this as something, a part of the reality. Now, add to this the issue of farmers who are not receiving water for their crops. This is the last stage of growth this season. They have to kind of finalize their crops for sale, and because of this lack of water, their crops would fail. So they're very angry. And this is something to note. When we talk about lack of water, we always think, oh yeah, you open the tap and there is no water. But for you living in urban areas, for us living in urban areas, yes, that's because water is not related to our job, really. But for farmers, water is their life. It's right. their subsistence, right? It's their income. So it makes a big difference for them. Now, why is this happening? Just for the reason I said. They don't have enough water in their reservoirs, and they're not releasing it. They got fooled by wet years, and they thought that a long wet period has started. They told people to go and grow whatever crops they wanted, including rice, which is a thirsty crop, and it requires a lot of water. And now, once we proceeded in the year, they realized that there's not enough water and they cannot satisfy the people. Now, there is water in the reservoir, but if they release it right now and it doesn't rain in a few months, the very same people are in a greater danger.
But this region, Kaveh, I mean, this paradox of Khuzestan, and I'm trying not to be a homer here, because my family lineage on my dad's side is from Khuzestan, from Ahvaz, and my dad was born in Ahvaz-born, and so I've heard this over the years, and Khuzestan it is reputed to be the nerve center of Iran's oil dependent economy. It owns nearly 80% of the country's crude, 60% of its natural gas. Why has it been kept systematically deprived and underdeveloped in the last 4 decades?
Okay, good point. So this systematic failure is not only in the water sector, right? So it is in it. If you think about it, it is in every sector. That's part of this game that Iran developed its system so bad. Its economic model was wrong. Its development model and land use model was wrong. So the growth happened in 4 or 5 metropolitans in the country. People moved to Tehran, they moved to Shiraz, they moved to Isfahan, they moved to Mashhad, some to Tabriz, and these places started growing and growing and growing and attracting more resources. Even within Khuzestan, more resources went to Ahvaz, and the other places didn't get enough resources. So you see this sort of imbalance between the growth and quality of life in some places which are richer and have more population, and some other places. The oil money came to Tehran, and it was distributed in the way that Tehran decided. It went to whatever they wanted to do outside the borders or inside the
So
borders.
to be clear, the resources of Khuzestan get usurped, but don't necessarily translate into money for education or health or roads or utilities in Khuzestan.
Yes, because of bad planning, because in the model that we have in Iran, Khuzestan doesn't own its resources. Now, I'm not advocating for saying that, okay, like, every place must not share its resources with the rest of the country, because these are all in one country. But I'm advocating for equality. I'm advocating for the satisfying the rights of the Khuzestanis must benefit from the resources which are in their territory. Otherwise, what are we seeing? Oil was discovered there long ago. We in the West took advantage of the economies in the West took advantage of the oil that comes from Khuzestan, right? We all owe to that oil. And Iran also owes its development to the money that came from Khuzestan. It was the sugar daddy of Iran for forever, and it did so much for Iran. And then you think about what Iran paid back to it. What did Iran do for it? Khuzestanis have left with pollution, water shortage, cancer, and pollution. Air pollution, soil pollution. Cancer, health problems, dust storms. Soil degradation, desertification, every problem, every environmental problem you name, wildfire, fires, everything, because this was not this income distribution model. We didn't have it this way. We just, whoever had more power moved the resource to his or her own region. Didn't think about this. They didn't, and we didn't. And honestly, Khuzestan is just one example. Bushehr province is next to Khuzestan. It provides most of the gas, natural gas in the country, and until recently, people didn't have access to piped gas that I had access to as a person who grew up in Tehran long ago, right? So Tehran is connected to gas, and Bushehr is not connected to gas, sitting next to the gas resources or sitting on the gas
you've
resources.
Actually made the point. I've heard you make the point that as much as this is about Khuzestan, it's not only about Khuzestan. Baluchistan, other places in Iran are also suffering in this crisis in particular.
Absolutely. So it's not the problem of it's Khuzestan, and it's systematic, as you said. It's systematic, and you see there are poor places, and they are deprived in every sector. So they have health issues, they have water issues, they have environmental issues, education issues, lack of investment, infrastructure issues, and you can find these places in Khuzestan, Kurdistan, Golestan, Baluchistan, everywhere these things exist, and this is the sad part. Now, Khuzestan is complaining, and they have come out and they're shouting for their rights. We have to support them, and this is the right moment. They're asking for the right thing, and other places also have the similar situation, and we shouldn't forget them. We have to access to clean water and sanitation and environment is a human right.
What do you think of the argument that there's a political dimension to this? That there's observers who say the government deliberately refuses to empower residents in Khuzestan, in the southwestern province, because it's home to a restive ethnic Arab minority, and this might potentially create the conditions where they can harbor plans for secession. What do you think of all of that?
I'm a scientist. I don't have enough evidence to say this is intentional, but I can certainly, by looking at the statistics, I can certainly say that there is a systematic problem, and this is not unique to the ethnic, the Arab community. So we have the same thing with other Sunni communities, for example, around Iran. We also have the same situation with some other ethnic groups within Iran. So definitely there is at the very least, a systematic failure there, which has resulted in the distance between the level of growth in these communities and the rest of the country. Now, whether they want to intentionally keep some communities poor, don't empower them because of future threats, it's hard to tell. And it's stupid if they do it, because they're shooting themselves in the foot. But we have seen a lot of stupid things happening in that country, so I don't get surprised.
That's certainly true. You sometimes use the term environmental justice. What do you mean by that?
Here's the thing, it has a lot of interpretations, but to make it simple and use one dimension of it here is the access to the environmental resources in Iran. Has it been distributed in a fair and just manner? The environmental services, or have we, for example, used the ecosystem services of Khuzestan or its natural resources to benefit the Iranians as a whole, but have left the pollution for the Khuzestanis? I see this as a really problematic problem that is missing is being overlooked in the discussions related to Iran, whether it's about the environment or human rights. This is a serious violation of human rights. Whatever we have done to Khuzestan and the damages we have caused are contributing to this, and we have to complain about it. And sometimes you sit down and watch. You might be a Tehrani who are watching the situation, and you feel bad, but you're not taking action. Sooner or later, this would be your situation. And we have seen it. We have seen the air pollution in Tehran. We have seen the air pollution in Isfahan. And one other thing, Jian, it's, people talk about a water transfer, right? And now they have even put people in conflict with people. And that's what I'm afraid of, because of wrong narratives and manipulated narratives and an emotional situation. So now, they tell the Khuzestanis that Isfahanis are taking your water. They tell the Isfahanis that the Kashanis and Yazdis are taking your water. Wow. They tell the Kermanis that the Isfahanis are not giving you
divide
water.
And conquer.
Right, exactly, and then they tell the Isfahanis that the Khuzestanis are not giving you water. But if you look at all these places, they're also suffering. We have at a moment people begging for water, both in Khuzestan and in Isfahan. Zayanderud is dry, Karun is dry. So it's like they have damaged the wrong policies, unsustainable development, uneven development has damaged all the country. And this is what we need to understand. We saw Lake Urumia, and we didn't see this coming in other places. We saw the situation of groundwater around the country, a big bomb, which is much bigger than the Lake Urumia underneath Iran, the Iranians, and people didn't see it, didn't think about it. These are really clock bombs in Iran, which we need to warn about and take action on. People probably thought I was paranoid complaining about all these things a few over the years, but we see how serious it can get.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to be right, but you were right.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And I know you're a scientist, not a politician, although you've been a politician, as we famously know as well. And so I can't end the conversation without asking about what's happened on the streets in Khuzestan. And I honestly think we being the world or the Iranians in the diaspora or people around the world, owe those who have protested in Khuzestan, in those cities, in those villages, a debt of gratitude, because they have, catapulted this issue, if not in the Western media, at least in the Iranian circles, into the forefront of our dialogue. And of course, they've done this in some cases at the cost of their own lives. The crackdown has been sadly trademark brutal. How does the state get away with the clampdown on these protests? In other words, what is their pretext at this point?
So you have seen that they're trying to say that, yes, we are, this is okay, this is just, and people are right, but still you see some brutality there. The one thing to note, of course, this absolutely we have to condemn whatever the Islamic Republic has done to the protesters. You cannot beat the people who are fighting for their right to live, for their right to breathe and drink. But the reality, people refer to these things as water wars, but the reality is that water is a trigger. People have accumulated anger for many, many, many reasons,
right.
And we all know those reasons, right? When the Syrian crisis happened, people blamed everything on a drought and simplified, the Westerners are reductionist thinkers, especially the scientists, and they saw a correlation between a drought and a system failure. They said, okay, a drought caused this, but the reality was the Ba'ath regime had planned really bad, in a bad way, similar way in its water sector, agricultural sector, and people had a lot of other complaints in that system, and then water became a trigger. Environmental problems essentially justify your expression of anger, and or other events. Right, 2 years ago it was the change of the gasoline price. We saw a lot of innocent young people getting killed and beaten, and those people probably didn't even have a car, didn't even have enough money to buy a car, but still they came out because it was the right moment to do that. Now, 2 years before that, it was a change of egg price, for example, in Iran. It's right. So once and that's the challenge they're having. Now they're trying to kind of live with this and do anger management, right? So verbal flirting and saying some good things, and then beating people on streets. But
let me just on that point. Let me actually quote. 8 days after the flare up of the protests, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said the water crisis in Khuzestan was, quote unquote, a painful concern. So, in other words, we're going to shoot you if you protest, maybe kill you, but what you're dealing with is a painful concern. It was difficult to square that thinking.
This is something we have seen. This is the problem of Iran's essentially governance system with a parliament that is having problems, and it can interfere with the process, with the government, that it doesn't have a full control of everything, a judicial system which has its own problems and corruption, and with the supreme leader. Now, in most cases, the supreme leader is the wise man who is coming in and giving some advices once the situation is calmer, and they this is what we are seeing. So of course the action, as always, is different from what you see,
the platitudes, right?
And but that is the thing. So things can get out of control, things can get out of, and that's what I teach at Yale, like environmental security in the Middle East, like how the environment can play a role in creating national security disasters, national security problems.
Which is how?
what you're seeing. Like, so once your life stops, once your source of income stops, if your economy is so much dependent on natural
I saw
resources,
intranational security issues inside your own country.
national security issues within your country, but you can have also international security issues if you are sharing a basin with transboundary source or something. But I'm talking about national security issues. In this case, international, some for
No,
example,
I said I was saying intra, like in other words, inside.
intra. Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. So this is a serious problem, and there is no easy solution to it, and it can evolve in any way. I mean, it's really not easy to tell what's going to happen next, and if it doesn't rain, that's it. Like, this is what is killing me, that the future of 80 plus, I don't know, million people, 82 million people, is dependent on clouds and wind in the near future. So the sky will determine the future of people. If it doesn't rain, Iran would face a serious problem.
Well, that's a setup for my final question. Unfortunately, despite the fact that you said this is complex and it's undoubtedly complicated and that it's impossible to know where this is going, I'm going to ask you, where do you think this is going? Because you do have some sense of these things. You have been deeply involved in the environmental issues. You understand the issue, and you also know how these things can serve as tipping points, as you've suggested, in terms of protest and it being the final straw, so to speak. Where is your sense of where this is going practically and politically in the coming days and weeks?
I really don't know. They don't have enough water. The water year, just so you know, ends in September. So October is the beginning of the next water year. Things can, if Iran gets lucky, there would be rain and things would go away for at least a while. There would be a band-aid there. On the ground, the actions of the government, I think it would be mostly focused on anger management, somehow doing some settlements with the angry farmers, for example, promising compensation. In some places, taking tankers to places, promising to fix the infrastructure. The big trouble is that in about 10 days or so, we have a transition of a government. So the new government would take over. They have to learn everything from scratch and start from everything from scratch. So this transition makes things scarier to me. We have a parliament, which is a populist. They are the ones who permitted rice growth in Khuzestan, for example, and we have a government which has promised to come with and try to fix the economic situation. And if they want to do that, they have to allow mining more and using more natural resources. So whatever I see, wherever I look at is very dark. Yeah. Even if JCPOA is restored and some relief is provided to Iran, I think that's very temporary, and I don't see them making radical changes to their development policies in a short period of time, unfortunately, within this environmental governance structure. And this is actually, in 2016, we wrote a paper about Iran's water bankruptcy. I mean, after a famous paper in 2014 about Iran's water crisis. And, I think about the last sentence is that there is minimal hope that within the current governance structure we see any change to the status of the water system and water management.
And if and when you're teaching at Yale, if a young student comes to you and says, "Professor Madani, I'm Iranian, I'm here at Yale, what can I do?" What do you say?
I mean, to those that, like us on this side of the planet, I want us to first understand and appreciate the complexities and trade-offs. Don't be too simplistic, and then empower the people of Iran, empower the experts of the country with knowledge, solutions, and right narrative. Right now, more than anything, we need the right narrative of what the problems are and how they can be fixed, what the solutions are. My at the end of my course, when students come to my course, and the first day they think the solutions are, piece of cake. In the Middle East, they don't have water. Okay, so they need to stop agriculture, reduce water consumption, import their food, and install solar energy, and stop selling oil. And the problems would be solved. We go through the course, they learn everything is dependent on something else. You try to fix the agricultural issue, reduce water consumption, you cause unemployment. You try to fix this, you create another problem. At the end of the course, I ask, so, what do you think? They're all weird, they tell me that they got disappointed and hopeless. But I always say, but you are now realistic. I mean, this sort of, now you have a better understanding of what is happening, and you can be more creative, or in developing practical solution, rather than the simple things like, reduce water consumption. Farmers need to stop growing this and that. Farmers need income. Government needs, wants to stay in power. Unemployment can cause revolutions. So you have to appreciate all these complexities to be able to solve the problem. I'm very pessimistic, but at the same time, what makes me hopeful is that humans are smart, and every crisis, if it doesn't result in a full failure of a system, and collapse of a system, they can create opportunities for addressing some inefficiencies. This problem has got so big that no one can deny it in the near future. So they can no longer call a person like myself a water terrorist or a bioterrorist because I'm speaking about water shortage in Iran. They cannot produce conspiracy theories that a drought or increasing drought is false, or is a lie, or like is the enemy's plan for Iran or whatever. So this is the good part, although this is a really bitter situation, as we all know.
Kaveh, your record is undiminished in leaving us depressed at the end of talking to you.
I'm so sorry.
And yet, I actually, I've always believed that you draw hope and you draw a belief in change by understanding issues. And this has been really helpful in terms of getting a basic sense, at least from what I can understand, and I hope folks listening, of what we're dealing with and potentially how that could lead to change. I thank you so much. I know you're very busy these days, and I know everybody wants to talk to you. I thank you so much for giving us this hour, and I look forward to our next chat.
Thank you, Jian. And I really hope our audience don't get disappointed. And let me add this, because people write to me, how about desalination? How about this technology and that technology? All those things can help. All those things can be part of the solution, but they cannot solve a problem which is rooted in Iran's political economy and Iran's economic model. As long as Iran is interested in pursuing its ideology and is in prioritizing its ideology over national interest, or national security in terms of as it relates to environmental protection. We can all be hopeful that these problems would be solved. I can see some band-aids kicking in and some band-aids being used, but I see this problem coming back every time at a greater scale. Thanks for having me, Jian.
Thank you, Kaveh. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kaveh Madani, a scientist, a writer, and currently a Henry Hart Rice Senior Fellow at Yale University, visiting professor at Imperial College London as well. Kaveh Madani joined us from Toronto today. All right. This is an edition of Roqe focused on explaining Khuzestan and the crisis in Iran right now. Remember, for all things Roqe, you can go to our website, roqemedia.com, where you can find all of our episodes, our guests from previous episodes, our special segments, and how to become a patron, roqemedia.com. Well, having heard from Kaveh Madani, let's get another perspective. This time, let's go to Paris and someone who knows the situation in Iran all too well from another angle. My next guest was the executive editor-in-chief of the daily newspaper Kayhan in Iran from 1972 to 1979. Amir Taheri has worked at or written for numerous publications, published numerous books, and has also been editor-in-chief of Jian, the Middle East correspondent for the London Sunday Times from 1980 to 1984, has written for the Pakistan Daily Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, and the Daily Mail, and he has been a regular presence as an expert on Iranian affairs everywhere from the BBC to CNN. And right now, Amir Taheri joins me from Paris, France. Hello, sir.
Hello to you.
Thank you very much for doing this. We've just heard from Kaveh Madani with an environmental perspective and context as to the dysfunction of water supply and roots of this crisis in Khuzestan and beyond. I want to ask you more about the social and political dimensions of what we're seeing. You were born in Ahvaz, in Khuzestan.
Yes, I was born in Ahvaz, and I lived there until I was 11. But I never severed my ties with Ahvaz. I have large family there. You know, our family has been rooted there for about 3 centuries. So I have a special attachment to Khuzestan.
Yes, as my family on my father's side as well. Can you reflect, Amirjan, on what we have witnessed, albeit from afar, for those of us not in Iran, over the last fortnight? What have you been feeling?
Well, you know, there is a dereliction of duty on the part of the present government in Tehran. I don't want to say that it was deliberate, but really, you know, they have done great injustice to Khuzestan, which used to be the vanguard of Iranian economic development and modernization. Ahvaz was the first Iranian city to have 24-hour electricity before Tehran. It was the first Iranian city to have water supplies, purified water supplies, long before Tehran had. So asphalted streets, you know, and so on, because it was the capital of the oil industry, which was the main source of income for Iran for about half a century. So suddenly, you know, to see Khuzestan, which has 17 rivers, including the largest Karun and many others, running out of water, you know, people being thirsty and so on. It is really heartbreaking. It's, as I said, I don't want to say it's done deliberately, but the result is the same. You know, Khuzestan used to be number 1 Iranian province in attracting direct foreign investment, but you know, since the revolution, of course, there has been no such investment anywhere. The Iranian oil industry is in crisis. Mr. Zangene, who is the oil minister, says we need $300 billion to revive the Iranian oil industry and save some major fields like Karun, Bibi Hakime, Marun, etc., from really going to waste. And the government in Tehran instead decides to invest in keeping Bashar al-Assad in power in Syria, or exporting revolutions and shenanigans like that. You know, the port of Khorramshahr used to be the biggest port in the Persian Gulf, and now it is, you know, out of its 12 jetties, only 2 of them are still operational. Half the city is still in ruins. All the palm groves, the date groves that were around it, which were burnt during the Iraqi invasion, have not been repaired. It has lost more than a third of its population, and the regime in Tehran seems oblivious of that. Then we have the Shat al-Arab, which has been clogged since the war, with boats sank there and minefields and so on. under President Rafsanjani, there was a plan to spend $2 billion to clean it and open it again to regular shipping.
So let me stop you, because you've said so much that I want to ask you about. And you have a particular insight, having been on the ground, having grown up there, having been an observer now. First of all, Kaveh Madani was talking about the complex marriage of all the different factors that have led to the situation, the crisis we're in today. How much do you think this is the story of mismanagement and incompetence, at least in terms of the water part? I'll get to the clampdown, the crackdown on protesters in a moment. But in terms of the water piece of this, how much is this the story of mismanagement from the current Iranian government?
Well, I really can't say mismanagement, because there is an ideological undertone in that. You see, Iran is a semi-dry country. We don't have much water. Therefore, in the 1960s, the Shah's government decided that we have better go, for value-added, high-price crops rather than low-price, cheap crops that require a lot of water, like rice and wheat. But Mr. Khomeini and his successors thought that, the Shah wanted to deprive the Muslims from bread and to be forced to eat bread coming from the infidels. So they decided to build a number of if you like dams around the country, even in dry places, to encourage Iranian farmers to grow rice and wheat instead of importing it. And because there is no central decision-making mechanism in this regime, it's everybody for himself.
When you talk about the Khuzestan being the vanguard, as it was through the 20th century, explain, if you will, for me and for the people listening who don't understand this. Explain the paradox of Khuzestan. It is the nerve center of Iran's oil economy. Nearly 80% of the country's crude, 60% of its natural gas. Why has that region, that is so crucial to creating the resources, been kept so systematically deprived and underdeveloped in the last 4 decades?
Well, you see, the Khuzestan has many advantages that the rest of Iranian provinces don't have. First of all, it has direct access to the sea. It has lots of water. It has fertile land. And at the same time, Khuzestan attracted a lot of young Iranians. In the 1960s, there was a movement, young man go south, like in the U.S., that once it was young man go west. So, the population of Khuzestan between 1955 and 1975 more than doubled, because it attracted a lot. Why? Because, of course, there was the oil industry. Of course, the oil industry is not itself very labor-intensive. And also Khuzestan is the only province in Iran which is entirely covered by railways, from north to south. And it had, of course, the biggest port in the country as well.
So all of that would all be the argument to reward this region, which is a golden region for you, for your country. So why has the opposite happened?
Well, as I'm trying to explain to you, the opposite happened because of demagoguery and because of ideological consideration. They said, Khuzestan has become, the crown in the jewel of Tehran. The Shah loved it, so whatever the Shah did, we should do the opposite. That has been the motto of Mr. Khomeini and his successors. And then they started dividing the Khuzestanis among themselves, because Khuzestan has also the unique feature of being the assembly place of all Iranians, from all provinces. There are Arab speakers, there are Lors, there are Bakhtiaris, there are Azerbaijanis, there are Tehranis, Khorasanis, Yazdis. Everybody is there. And, they have been active in all parts of life in Khuzestan since then. So the present regime came and started dividing them into Shia and Sunnis, native, non-native, and so on, and sowed really the seeds of dissension in many parts of the province.
So this systematically deprived and underdeveloped place now faces a dire water shortage, like some other regions of Iran. The people begin to raise their voices for these basic human rights. And then there's a brutal government crackdown. Now, it's quite confounding, just from a straight public relations point of view, why you would do. What is the pretext used by the state for cracking down like this on people who are literally just asking for basic rights?
Well, first of all, let me remind you that in many parts of Iran there is shortage of water, but people accept it because it's a fact of life. For example, if you are in southern Khorasan province, there is no water, and everybody knows it. And they take it as part of fate or background. So nobody does. But in Khuzestan, you really go mad when you see all these rivers, all over getting dried or being abused. You can't. This is quite different. If you are in the I've traveled in Algeria and Sahara too. Nobody there, demonstrates for water,
right?
Because they know there is no water.
Right.
So this is the first thing, and the pretext now that the regime is using is either spreading the rumor that these are secessionists, who want to set up, a separate country in Khuzestan, or they are followers of the Pahlavi family, or members of the Mujahideen Khalq, or armed groups financed by Arab powers or even by Turkey. This is the pretext they are using, and they refuse to address the real issues which can be addressed and which can be solved. The problems could be solved. If we have an ordinary government, not an ideal government, just a government that behaves normally. I may not like it, but you may not like it. But if it starts acting just like a normal government, like 190 countries in the world, Khuzestan's problems are easily solved compared to problems of other Iranian provinces, which are far more complex.
The regime seems to, in this case, be playing both sides to a certain extent by suggesting that they're sympathetic to the issues of the water crisis, but at the same time shooting people in the streets who raise their voices about it. What do you think of Khamenei saying this is a painful concern, the water crisis, that is, last week?
Well, the Khamenei has, developed a profile for himself as the outsider, the observer. In Iranian folklore, we always have the shahed, somebody who looks, if you see in these classical Iranian curtains where there is a painting of something happening and there is somebody in the corner just watching. And Khamenei has cast himself in that role as if he's not involved. And he comes and makes a speech every now and then. But, it is, either he's really a nobody and is not part of decision-making, or he's a front for a star chamber, the parallel government or whatever. But at the same time, other people who work with him, they say nothing can be done without his say-so. So, who is lying, he or his entourage? Look at Mr. Rouhani said last week that his government in the past 8 years has done nothing without the approval of the supreme guide, that is Mr. Khamenei. So it is really very worrying if Mr. Khamenei too has no power. So this is Iran is a ship in a storm without a captain.
When you say Khuzestan's problems are easily solved, I don't know if you're being just sort of anecdotal or if you're actually being serious about that. If this was this was years in the making of depriving a region, mismanagement, corruption, incompetence. How do you see these issues being easily resolved?
Well, we already have plans to revive the port of Khorramshahr. This could be, we could start working on it tomorrow. I mean, not me, but I mean the present government itself. We also have a plan costed at about $4 billion to clean the Shuttle Arab. That could also be done. The plan is there. So instead of giving money to Hezbollah, you could spend the money on that. Then, there are Khuzestani war refugees, who are spread all over the country. They could be helped, given bank loans and so on to go back home. You could also, how shall I say, start bringing in some technology to keep our oil fields operating. But the regime, or Mr. Khamenei, or whoever is in charge, for example, refuses American, British, and Dutch companies. And unfortunately, these are the only three countries with the know-how for the oil industry. Even Putin in Russia is using them. So if we lifted the ban on using these companies too, we could revive our. Then there is the completion of the Darhoein nuclear power station, which has been abandoned for years. Again, the plans are there. As far as water is concerned, the closure of the second Kuhrang tunnel, which transfers water from Khuzestan, and instead the construction of a tunnel between the river Khersan and the river Karun could, save this river from going completely dry. Then dredging the rivers Jarrahi, Marun, Zohre, Bahmanshir, Dez, etc. could also help. And there are plans for these from before the revolution and from after the revolution. The tragedy of Iran is that if you forget about the 2,000 or 3,000 ideologues who are on top, underneath we have the experts. We have good engineers, we have good economists within the present system. And they prepare plans, they offer it, nobody listens to them at all. So then there is the question of injecting more money into a kind of moribund economy in Khuzestan, paying the wages of Haft Tape cane sugar complex so that they don't go on a strike all the time and they produce, reviving the agro-industrial projects that had been closed down because they were producing food that were sold, for example, in London or in Paris or wherever. This is really ideological blindness. If you leave aside the ideological blindness, Khuzestan is a pot of gold. You put $1, you come out with $10.
A final question to you with respect to how you see this as a possible tipping point or not in terms of change in Iran. You've seen so much. You were there in the 70s, and you were there at the revolution, and then you would know that many of us in the diaspora are used to the conversation whenever there's protests and there's an appetite for change, whether it was the 2009 dispute, mock election there that brought people into the streets in the Green Movement, or more recently the Ahvaz-born protests, or after Flight 752. There is this feeling, Navid Afkhari, there's always a feeling like, okay, well, this is the time that is going to lead to significant change in Iran because people are finally fed up and they can't take it anymore. Where do you think this latest set of protests fits in that spectrum?
Well, although I come from the Middle East, but I don't pretend to be a prophet. But what I can see is that, I've always put 5 conditions for regime change in any country. And of these 5 conditions, At least 3 of them are present in Iran today, and we are on the way to achieving the 2 others too. So this regime is moribund. It is like a zombie. I don't know whether it will fall tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but for practical reasons, it's already dead. It can't do anything. It cannot change the Iranian society. The Iranian society is a very active, dynamic, modern, aspiring society, and doesn't care about the dominant ideology. So there is this big break between Iran as a nation state and Iran as a vehicle for ideology. So the struggle will continue. Something is completely broken and cannot be mended again. So we'll have to see. The important thing about the current protests, there are 2 important things. First of all, that they have spread to many parts of the country. Almost 100 towns and cities are participating in one way or another. And secondly, that they are becoming political. They started, of course, with socioeconomic grievances or tangible issues, but now they have become political, and there is the talk of regime change is spreading throughout Iran.
Amir Taheri, it is an education talking to you. I thank you very much for this today.
Pleasure is mine. Have a good night.
Khudafez.
Khudafez.
Amir Taheri, writer, journalist, editor, who was the editor-in-chief of Kayhan in Iran from 1972 to 1979. He's also the author of 13 books. We reached Amir Taheri in Paris, France today. Let's get the microphones back on for Shaya, Group Shaya and Captain Reza. Well, that's been a lot of information for the last hour and a half, and I really appreciate both these guests and the way Kaveh Madani took us through the steps of the water function and dysfunction in Iran. And then Amir a little bit more pointed in terms of the ideological reasons behind what's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, I can feel hope in Kaveh's voice, although
even though everything he's saying is depressing.
Yes, but I feel hope in his voice, and I hope the hope in his voice comes true.
Yeah, but Kaveh is a realist, and it's because he's a scientist as well. And when he was the example he gave us when he was talking about, he said, "Well, CN Tower, you live in Toronto. CN Tower is an amazing architecture, and you guys can be proud of it." But essentially, what he's trying to say, if you don't know how to manage it, if there is no proper management, there is no use. You can be proud of all dams you have. But
and also, what good is it?
What good is it?
True. What does the CN Tower really do for you?
That's so true. That is so true.
I'm focusing a lot of my anger not on Khuzestan, but the CN Tower. All of a sudden, it's become the source of my
source of all problems.
I really also appreciated Amir Taheri talking about Khuzestan. Despite the fact that I have family from there and even some extended family still in Ahvaz. I didn't really know that. I mean, I've sort of heard bits and pieces. Ahvaz-born was this hot center of action and culture, but that really Khuzestan was a happening place. Like the young people were going there, and it was really the burgeoning new place in the 60s and 70s. Because it's not necessarily thought that way. Now, despite it being resource rich, it's not thought of as the hipster place,
No, as soon as I think the Brits or the Americans, like they took the refinery out, everything kind of fell apart. I mean, after the revolution, shortly after. But before that, my mom used to say that she used to be like, "Amrikay dovam bud Abadan." Like it was the second America. Like it was the hot place. You would go there for vacation and everything. It's sad. It's really a sad state.
Yeah, I told at the previous episode that Mr. Ellington played in.
Yes, yes, Duke Ellington.
What did you say? What did you say? You made a mistake.
Duke Eglinton. Shai speaks in since he's been taking the subway in Toronto. He only knows subway stops now. Duke Eglinton. Listen, a shout out to Arash and Anita Fazelipour, who are the founders of MyTerms.ca, a successful mortgage company in Ontario, Canada. They believe in educating their clients to understand every aspect of the financing being obtained, and they see each transaction through from the beginning to the end to make sure that they are closed with ease. If you're looking for a mortgage in the Toronto or Greater Ontario region, go to MyTerms.ca. MyTerms.ca, they are among the best, and both Arash and Anita make it a priority to give back to the Persian community. We thank them for that. Big thanks to them and myterms.ca. All right. Lots coming up in the coming days on Roqe. Dr. Sheila Nazarian, Ali Parsa, Hamid Saidi, Tara Tiba, and lots more. This is Full Time for Roqe for today. Remember, for all things Roqe, including becoming a patron of our program and supporting us for $5 or $10 a month, go to roqemedia.com, see all the fancy pictures and drawings, and press the red Support Us button as well. roqemedia.com. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. Sabi Roham, Super Patty Saw, sponsorship Sean, the fabulous Keon, Thoughtful Nagin, Ponsa the artist, producer Susan, Ahoy Merdad, Captain Reza and Groovy Shaya. Thank you to all of you out there supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you have not done so already. Find me on Instagram at Jian Gomeshi. In the meantime, Mizun Bashin.